Hi, everyone, and welcome to Module 4. My name is Priscilla Huang. I'm with the Center for Asian Americans in Action, and I will be presenting today's training, which is about making your voice heard. This module is going to basically be all about advocacy. What is advocacy? What are the different levels of government that you can engage with? How do you think about advocacy in terms of your advocacy strategies and efforts? So we'll be covering a lot of that during the module. To give you a little bit of a sense of what we're going to cover, there'll be two parts to the module. Part one will be a training on what is advocacy. So we'll talk about the who, what, when, where, why, and how of advocacy, which can serve as a framework for developing your advocacy plan. Part two will focus on how laws and policies are made. We'll talk about the different levels of government and spend some time talking about county budgets as well. If you're interested in learning more about policy or about health policy concepts in particular, I recommend watching Module 3, which provides an overview about health policy. So with that, we will get started on what is advocacy. So advocacy is about using your spheres of influence, or really engaging with others and expanding your spheres of influence to change a decision or to make a change in your community. So every person has many influences in their life, and these influences can change a person's personality, their beliefs, their actions, and our spheres of influence can include family and friends and our social circles. But even on a broader level, we can influence neighbors, our schools, and even out to our city, county, state, and federal government levels. So all of these spheres have an impact on an individual's life. And as we as individuals can also make an impact on each of these spheres through advocacy. So let's talk a little bit about some of the basics of advocacy. A nice definition that I like to use is that advocacy is taking action to advance a cause, a recommendation, or a policy that you believe in and working to influence that decision making. So there are a lot of different types of advocacy. Legislative advocacy is probably one that a lot of people think about. That's the one where you are engaging with elected officials to talk about a bill or to talk about a law. That's legislative advocacy. There's administrative advocacy, where you talk with public agencies, for example. You can engage in media advocacy. The media can make a huge impact in how people think about an issue. Data research advocacy is another one. Electoral advocacy, engaging with people to shape and influence how they think about candidates. And then ultimately, advocacy is about making your voice heard. So making your voice heard really is about sharing your viewpoints when decisions are being made, and that can affect your life. I wanted to spend a little time talking about advocacy versus lobbying because this is a question that comes up quite a bit. And there's a misconception that advocacy is the same thing as lobbying, and it's not. So a rule of thumb to remember is that all lobbying is advocacy, but not all advocacy is lobbying. So let me explain that a bit. So when we talk about lobbying and we're talking about the federal definition of lobbying, there's a very specific definition that goes into play. So that is that there's a communication with a policymaker or staff for the purpose of influencing their position on a specific piece of legislation. That is the definition of lobbying. And you'll see that I underlined some parts of that definition. And the reason for that is because you need all three of those things to happen for it to be a lobbying activity. So if you are doing two of those things, but not the third one, that's not lobbying, that's advocacy. So one example is that you meet with a senator and urge them to vote for a bill that will provide more COVID relief funding for your local health department. So if the primary purpose of that meeting with their senator is to tell them to vote for or against a particular bill, a piece of legislation, that is lobbying. Advocacy, on the other hand, is much broader than lobbying. So advocacy is generally can be described as, educating a policymaker or their staff. So if we turn back to that example about the meeting with the senator, you can still meet with the senator to educate them about the impact of COVID-19 and what the virus has, the impacts of the virus on your health department's ability to provide services, without saying anything about a particular piece of legislation, and just telling them, showing them research and telling them stories and helping them understand what's happening in your community. That would be advocacy and not lobbying. So now let's turn to the 5 W's framework in advocacy. And we'll start with one of the most fundamental questions. What is the issue that you're trying to address? So, when we're thinking about advocacy, we want to be very clear about identifying the particular issue, the change that you want to propose and that you think will benefit you or your community. You also want to talk about your goals. What are your goals? What is the change that you're working towards? What do you need to solve it? Is it a change in law? Is it a change in policy? Is it funding? And then also you want to talk about what is the shared vision that you have within your community. How are you going to talk about this issue in a way that brings others along? So some of the strategies for doing that can be through raising awareness in your community, talking to other people about this issue. You can influence other stakeholders. And a lot of times advocates will try to build a coalition or work in collaboration with other people or organizations. So these are all important considerations when you're thinking about your advocacy plan. Your next question will be about where. Where are relevant decisions made? So this is obviously a key question as well, because in order to target your advocacy, you need to find out who has the power to make the change you're seeking in your community. So where do you need to direct your advocacy efforts? Is it at the federal level, the state level, county, city, or some other government body? We also want to talk about the who. Who are the players? Who can affect change on this issue? Who has the power to make those changes? Who else needs to be involved? Are there others who are already doing this work who you can collaborate with? So a lot of this is about building your advocacy community. You also want to think about who can help influence the change that you want. So you might be able to identify your target, meaning the person or group of people or legislative body that you need to change, to advocate for change. But there are also a lot of other stakeholders and other influencers that can help your cause. So you can go to the media, for example, with a story about the issue and about the change that you're seeking. You can go to academic institutions and see if they can provide research or data support. There might be labor unions in the area that can help to organize and mobilize folks in support of your cause. So you want to think about, within your community and within the ecosystem of changes and influence, who are the other key players? When can your action have the most impact? When will there be key opportunities to facilitate progress? So here you want to think about finding those windows of opportunity. Maybe there's a moment that is coming up in the calendar that can be a strategic moment for action that can make your advocacy more powerful because of an anniversary or a holiday, and that can help bring more attention to the issue. When you bring more attention to an issue, it helps to raise awareness, and it can also build more pressure for action and get more people involved. So the when question is also important because you want to think about when relevant decisions are made. So if one of the goals for your advocacy is for there to be more funding, for example, you might want to time your advocacy efforts so that you are preparing recommendations and talking to policymakers during the budget process. Why? So why is a key question as well. Why is this change needed? Why is this issue important to me and my community? And why will others be motivated to help advocate for this change? So the why question is often about messaging. You want to target your message to make an impact. So this can be through framing up your message so that when you're talking with a particular policymaker or somebody else, a stakeholder, somebody who could be helpful for your cause, you want to try to identify a shared goal or maybe a shared passion so that they remember and can relate to this issue. The why question is also about you. Why is this issue important to you? A lot of times you are the most effective messenger and the most effective advocate on an issue because you might have a direct experience or a family member might have a lived experience that really illustrates the problem and why this issue needs to change. It could be that you have a lot of passion for the issue. People in the community can really gravitate towards somebody when they're passionate about a particular cause. Or it could be that you have a lot of expertise and that makes you important and relevant to the conversation because of your work experience or because of your educational experience. All of those things matter. And then last but not least is the how. And the how is really focused on, creating that action plan. What are the things that you need to put in place in order to accomplish your goal? How will you develop and carry out that action plan? How will you share responsibilities and also share accomplishments with others? How will you maintain momentum? So the sustainability part of an advocacy campaign is also really important. People put in a lot of time and energy into the things that they care about, but change sometimes can take time. It can take months or years or even decades for things to actually happen, for there to be enough change and movement, that a policy change is possible. And so you want to think about all the different steps that you need to put in place, that could be put in place, that help you progress closer and closer towards your goal. So the message I really want to end with in this part of the module is that advocacy is for everyone. There is a way to engage and to use your voice and to use your influence within your communities to affect change. And with that, we will end this portion of the module.